Happy Saturday and welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show. Congratulations, you have made it another week in life in this crazy administration. It is a blessing that you are here. It is Saturday. Deep breaths, get some rest, but also heads up, eyes open, stay focused because there is still a lot of news that's breaking out there that requires your attention, but also, quite frankly, is extremely important and pivotal right now. But I want to start the show tonight with something that isn't, I feel, getting relatively a lot of attention. I mean, everything that's happening right now, there's been lots of focus on what Elon Musk and Trump are doing right now in the government. But I want to focus particularly on something that is pivotal to our national security. It's pivotal to the rule of law, and it's pivotal to how we govern in terms of our country somewhat still being a democratic republic. This is from my book here, Resistance. Rule number 4, quote, defend institutions. Do not fall into the trap of complacency, believing that our institutions will safeguard democracy on their own. It is our duty to actively defend them, for without vigilance, they will fall, they will crumble like dominoes. In the absence of opposition, protest, or outright resistance to the abuses of power by would-be authoritarians, these institutions will weaken, falter, and ultimately succumb. End quote. Right now, as you look at it, our institutions are facing an unprecedented attack on all fronts. I mean, all of our democratic institutions are facing incredible attacks right now. And it is up to us, quite frankly, to defend them, or they will fall. Trump is actively trying to become a dictator right now with the full belief that he answers to no one. Not even the courts. You might remember a few weeks ago that a federal judge said that the White House directly defied a ruling from her, putting the nation in a constitutional crisis. Because if the president starts believing that he can defy judicial orders, believing that he is above the law and not constrained by the courts, well, then we have a major crisis on our hands. And what makes that crisis even worse is if you put people in place who are going to be loyal to you and to you only, not the Constitution, but only to you. And you might remember that when Donald Trump picked Matt Gaetz, a known child sex trafficker and pedophile, to be the attorney general, that nomination fell apart. And the only thing that he essentially was good for was being pro-MAGA, being pro-Trump. He was a staunch loyalist. And so because that didn't go through, he tapped a woman named Pam Bondi to be the attorney general. She's a former Florida attorney general. And this pick wasn't any better because understanding the history between these two is essential here. Because when Pam Bondi was the attorney general of the state of Florida, her office was investigating allegations of fraud by the scam college Trump University, which wasn't real, by the way. And it was part of a class action lawsuit in New York. And just after she announced that her office was looking into this, a huge $25,000 donation from Donald Trump's campaign, from Donald Trump, dropped into her reelection fund. And phew, that case was unceremoniously dropped. They were no longer investigating or asking questions or reviewing any allegations about Trump University. So that was back in 2013. In 2015, when Donald Trump announced that he was running for president, she endorsed him, and ever since then, she has been full MAGA. And when Trump nominated Pam Bondi to be the Attorney General of the United States, that conflict of interest was rightfully pointed out again. But more disturbingly, her inability to say who won the 2020 presidential election and her willingness to relitigate this as the Attorney General. This is something that they actually want to do at the Department of Justice under Donald Trump. Open an investigation into 2020. When it's clearly overwhelming that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. But with that in mind, and them knowing that, even Donald Trump knowing that himself, watch how she answers when asked about it before senators during her confirmation hearing.
Most Americans believe that central to the peaceful transition of power in a democracy is the acceptance of the results of an election. To my knowledge, Donald Trump has never acknowledged the legal results of the 2020 election. Are you prepared to say today under oath without reservation that Donald Trump lost the presidential contest to Joe Biden in 2020?
Ranking Member Durbin, President Biden is the President of the United States. He was duly sworn in, and he is the President of the United States. There was a peaceful transition of power. President Trump left office and was overwhelmingly elected in 2024.
Who won the 2020 presidential election?
Joe Biden is the President of the United States.
Ms. Bondi, you know that there is a difference between acknowledging it and, I can say that Donald Trump won the 2024 election. I may not like it, but I can say it. You cannot say who won the 2020 presidential election. Okay. It's disturbing.
So she's asked about this multiple times. Her response to who won the 2020 presidential election? Joe Biden is the president of the United States. So did Biden win the election? Joe Biden is the president. So you see here, the refusal and the reluctance to answer such a question and also to call the transition of power after the 2020 election peaceful is just horrifically frightening, considering that she is the nominee to be the chief law enforcement officer in the country. She's trying to be the Attorney General of the United States, and she cannot answer a basic question. And this was her response to being asked if it was right for Donald Trump to describe the January 6th insurrectionists as hostages and patriots.
I'd like to know whether you agree with some of the statements President-elect Trump made during the election, during the campaign. First, are the felons convicted of breaking into the Capitol on January 6th hostages or patriots? I'm quoting Trump, as President-elect Trump has said repeatedly. Do you agree with his characterization of the felons that I referred to?
I am not familiar with that statement, Senator.
I just familiarized you with that statement. Do you agree with that statement?
I'm not familiar with it, Senator.
I am not familiar with that statement. Democratic Senator from the state of Hawaii, Mazie Hirono, then essentially asked her again, and then she says essentially the same thing. Of course, Pam Bondi was confirmed as the Attorney General of the United States. And after she is confirmed and sworn in at the White House, these were the very first words that she uttered.
Thank you, President Trump. I've known you for many, many years, and I will not let you down.
Thank you, President Trump. I've known you for many years, and I will not let you down. No, you cannot say that. You are the Attorney General of the United States. There is not supposed to be a close relationship between you and the President of the United States because of the rule of law in this country. Because of the impropriety, of course. The Attorney General at DOJ and the White House are supposed to be completely separate because DOJ is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to operate independent without political pressure or without pressure from the White House, essentially, to do or to not do certain things. But with Pam Bondi, of course, Trump now has a full-on loyalist at the Department of Justice. And for years on Fox, Pam Bondi has vowed to go after prosecutors who are anti-Trump and launch an investigation that would prove that Trump actually won the 2020 election. Hence her reluctance not to fully answer that when asked before senators. And all of it is nonsensical and false, but it's quite serious because Pam Bondi is serious about this, and she is also assisted by this guy.
What you need to show is whether or not the FBI and government agents were using undercover operatives and informants on the day of January 6th. So once you prove that, then you defeat the insurrection narrative with the FBI's own documentation. Forget what the videotape shows.
I started smirking and rolling my eyes. And what I meant to convey with that is, come on, we know they were involved.
No, look, I totally
clarify,
agree.
Though.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I know definitively. It looks like you have a preponderance of evidence suggesting there may have been federal law enforcement involved in making that thing happen.
I'll get you beyond a reasonable doubt.
We collectively joined forces to take on the most powerful enemy that the United States has ever seen. And no, it's not Washington, D.C., it's the mainstream media.
He will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice.
Fake news mafia, we have to hunt down the people in the fake news media who made the deep state a reality.
I get that we are all physically and mentally exhausted right now, but you should know that, sorry to break it to you, that guy, Kash Patel, is the confirmed FBI director. He believes that the FBI was behind January 6th, backed a song for the January 6th insurrectionist, has threatened to arrest members of the media, and wants to close the FBI building in DC. And that guy is Kash Patel, now the newly confirmed FBI director. And when Donald Trump was president last, he wanted to make that guy, Kash Patel, deputy director of the FBI. But Bill Barr said, quote, "over my dead body." We're going to have more reporting on Kash Patel and all of Trump's cabinet officials in a special report coming next week. But, there is a lot going on. I do get that with Trump and Musk wrecking the government, but also watch what's happening in these pivotal positions here. The FBI and the Department of Justice work hand in hand together, and these two Trump loyalists are leading those agencies now. And with them in charge, spewing just whack-a-mole nonsense on podcasts, talking to podcast hosts about, you know what? I think the FBI was responsible for January 6th. We're going to go after members of the media. We're coming for you. We're putting you on notice. With people like that in charge, the mass firings have begun in a way that is politically targeted and meant to benefit Trump and Trump only, and also to use those agencies as a prosecutorial firing squad for anyone that the president does not like, is a political enemy, or simply does not agree with him. And it's already started. In late January, you may not have seen this news because there was a lot happening around the time that Donald Trump was inaugurated, but Edward Martin, Trump's pick to lead the DC Attorney's Office, got his job because he defended a January 6th insurrectionist in court. So the lawyer of a January 6th defendant is the interim U.S. attorney in DC. Okay, so let me just put my head around this. And then, of course, one of Donald Trump's personal lawyers is also essentially at Main Justice right now. So, going back to the guy who's leading the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., that, of course, is a conflict of interest. Because when it came time for Donald Trump to pardon all the January 6th insurrectionists, that same lawyer wanted to then defend his client. But you can't defend your client in court. You can't represent a former client while serving in the office that investigated him. That is a major conflict of interest. Every lawyer knows that. But in his new role as the U.S. attorney in D.C., he has fired more than 30 federal prosecutors who investigated the January 6th insurrection. And all of them were just fired as the Trump administration is looking to erase the history of that day. And the fact that it was a violent assault on U.S. democracy, an attempt to overthrow the results of a free and fair election in which the American people voted him out of office. So Martin fires 30 federal prosecutors at the DC Attorney's Office, and that same week, FBI officials were asked to hand over internal documents of investigations of election interference, the Mar-a-Lago raid, and also to hand over the names of the agents, all the agents who prosecuted the January 6th domestic terrorist and who investigated it. FBI officials were then sent over a Dear Colleague letter directing them to follow orders and send necessary information over. On Thursday of this week, the head of the FBI's field office in New York was forced out because of that demand to hand over a list of agents who investigated January 6th. He said, "No, I'm not doing it." So he was forced out by the Trump administration. He was celebrated, of course, and applauded in a remarkably emotional moment. But further attacks have continued. In mid-February, all Biden-era U.S. attorneys were fired, including those who worked with special counsel Jack Smith on investigating Trump for federal election interference and inciting insurrection. Then that same month, the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, had a corruption case dropped against him. In September of last year, you might remember that Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, was indicted on federal charges including bribery, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and solicitation of contributions from foreign nationals. And the indictment laid out how Adams accepted over $100,000 in luxury travel benefits from Turkish officials in exchange for political favors, such as pressuring the New York City Fire Department to approve the opening of a Turkish consular building without a fire inspection. Additionally, of course, Adams was accused of omitting these gifts from mandatory disclosures and orchestrating a scheme to conceal the true source of campaign contributions. Eric Adams then pled not guilty to all of these charges, calling it politically drummed up. And after Trump was elected, he went down to Mar-a-Lago to go meet with the president-elect. and then started publicly praising him, saying that he and the Democrats should work with Trump, not against him. Trump gets into office, Pam Bondi is confirmed as the Attorney General, and the charges against Eric Adams are magically dropped. Because, of course, Eric Adams is a friend of the president. I'm doing you a political favor. That is a quid pro quo. An example of the Justice Department abdicating its responsibility to prosecute and hold anyone and everyone accountable who break the law, regardless of their personal or political relationship with the President of the United States. And of course, after that, multiple federal prosecutors resigned because of that just insane impropriety that transpired. If the Justice Department is only going to work for the president's enemies, if it's only going to work to prosecute the president's enemies and then not go after the president's friends, but instead drop charges against them, well, then what's the point of serving at Main Justice? What's the point of being an attorney at the United States Federal Justice Department if we're not going to actively pursue the law here? If we are not going to honor the rule of law and the separation of powers? That same month, in February, another federal prosecutor resigned after she was asked to open a criminal investigation into members of the Biden administration. She resigned, citing, of course, that it was illegal and politically motivated. And then a few weeks ago, Trump nominated Dan Bongino, this guy, to be the deputy director of the FBI. He is also a far-right podcast host. I kid you not. They literally pluck these people off TV shows, just like with the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, and the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Dan Bongino, Trump picked him to be the deputy director of the FBI, who has made multiple appearances and statements such as that he'll get rid of the agency, he'll focus on crimes like drug dealing, and all the officials who have shown disloyalty to Trump by pursuing investigations of him and his supporters, they should be fired. This is how Dan Bongino thinks.
We fire everyone who stood by. We don't just fire the people who did this. Everyone who stood by and did nothing. While the Department of Justice and the FBI have been ravaged by corruptocrats, everyone gets fired. Everyone. If you stood by and did nothing. That's how. Ladies and gentlemen, the FBI is an absolute disaster. It is an abomination to the country. The corruption needs to be immediately defunded. The FBI should no longer exist as it's constituted now. The mission should be divvied up. The money should be divvied up amongst other agencies that take their oath to the country seriously.
That is Dan Bongino, who will become the deputy director of the FBI on March 17th. So just take a moment to let that sink in and think about what that means. I mean, right now, Pam Bondi is actively investigating those who are anti-Trump and going on Fox News telling Sean Hannity that we're getting out the worst of the worst. We're gutting each department one by one, rooting out the Biden-era corrupt prosecutors. We're getting them out of the Justice Department. We're throwing them out of DOJ. The interim DSC attorney, Edward Martin, is threatening to go after anyone who is against Elon Musk, including calling him a dick, is dangerous. Anyone is threatening essentially to go after anyone who is against Elon Musk, but also if you call him a dick and you're in Congress, he's going after you too, of course, because calling someone a dick is life-threatening, apparently. I mean, just also today, national security officials were removed at DOJ as these mass firings are continuing to happen. You know what else is happening at DOJ this week? Attorney General Pam Bondi released the Epstein files, at least in part. But oops, it was missing lots of information, which she is now looking into. Information, of course, that also consists of Donald Trump's predatory relationships with underage girls, including, as noted in a court filing, forcing a young girl to perform oral sex on him. I'm going to read you directly from the court filing that was released last summer on this. I should warn you, this is repulsive and it is also quite explicit. It's directly from the ruling here. Quote, on the third occasion involving the defendant, Donald J. Trump, the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, was forced to engage in an unnatural lesbian act with her fellow minor and sex slave, Maria Doe, age 12, for the sexual enjoyment of defendant Trump. After this sex act, both minors were forced to orally copulate defendant Trump by placing their mouths simultaneously on his erect penis until he achieved sexual orgasm. After zipping up his pants, defendant Trump physically pushed both minors away while angrily berating them for their poor quality of their sexual performance. Remember, these are young girls. On the fourth and final sexual encounter with the defendant, Donald J. Trump, the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, was tied to a bed by defendant Trump, who then proceeded to forcibly rape plaintiff Johnson. During the course of this savage sexual attack, plaintiff Johnson loudly pleaded with defendant Trump to please wear a condom. Defendant Trump responded by violently striking plaintiff Johnson in the face with his open hand and screaming that he would do whatever he wanted, as he refused to wear protection. After achieving sexual orgasm, the defendant, Donald J. Trump, put his suit back on, and when the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, in tears, asked defendant Trump what would happen if he had impregnated her, defendant Trump grabbed his wallet and threw some money at her and screamed that she should use the money to, quote, get a effing abortion. So that is directly from a court filing, of course, in which it is described of sexual abuse between Donald Trump and the victims here, of course. And when there wasn't this major release delivered on the Epstein files like everybody had hoped for this week, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, went on Fox and said it's going to take a minute because we're redacting certain information because it'll hurt national security. Which begs the question here, what is the information that's going to hurt national security? Is this information set to be redacted about Donald Trump? And if so, why are you redacting it? Isn't that of public interest? Shouldn't the public know this? That the President of the United States berated young girls after abusing and raping them. Says defendant Trump grabbed his wallet and threw some money at her and screamed that she should use the money to, quote, get a effing abortion. You swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, Pam Bondi. Not to one man or to one woman, you swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. But of course, in Pam Bondi, in Edward Martin, in Kash Patel, and in Dan Bongino, Donald Trump has found his sycophants. People who are willing to do anything and everything for him, even if it means going against the Constitution and the rule of law. And think about that for a second. Democratic institutions typically break because of external attacks and threats by the president or the elected leader. But in this case, the attacks are coming from within. He has appointed various officials who are diametrically unqualified to serve in the roles that they have been appointed to and are completely loyal to him and to him only. And they are there to break these institutions and to weed out the officials, agents, and prosecutors who are against him. Things have gotten so bad in this country with these incessant attacks that essentially, incessant attacks on the rule of law, threats to impeach judges who rule against the Trump administration, that the American Bar Administration just this week released another statement condemning the administration. It reads here, quote, 3 weeks ago, the American Bar Association spoke to you about the values that guide us. We called upon every lawyer to insist that the Trump administration adhere to 4 major principles of law that have guided our country for over 200 years. Defending judges and courts, acknowledging the role of the courts, adhering to the rule of law, and respecting the separation of powers and the 3 co-equal branches of government with distinct duties and responsibilities. These principles have been bedrocks of American democracy. The ABA does not shrink from standing in support of each of them. Since that time, government actions evidence a clear, disconcerting pattern. If a court issues a decision that this administration does not agree with, the judge is targeted. If a lawyer represents parties in a dispute with the administration, or if a lawyer represents parties the administration does not like, lawyers are targeted. We issued statements standing up for those four key principles. And a government official targeted us by instructing some of its lawyers not to attend ABA meetings or participate as speakers. These actions highlight escalating governmental efforts to interfere with fair and impartial courts, the right to counsel and due process, and the freedom of speech and association in our country. We speak today on behalf of the legal professionalism and its members who seek to live by the oath each took upon admission to the bar. This is not something we do lightly, nor is it the first time we have spoken in opposition to actions against an administration, regardless of political party. We sued or opposed policy proposals of the last few administrations when they failed to adhere to the rule of law or interfered with access to justice. And we are doing the same with the current administration. We are nonpartisan. We stand for the rule of law. We stand for the vital rule of our courts and the essential job that lawyers do every day throughout our country. We have stood on this ground for many years. We reject efforts to undermine the courts and the profession. We will not stay silent in the face of efforts to remake the legal profession into something that rewards those who agree with the government and punishes those who do not. Words and actions matter, and the intimidating words and actions we have heard must end. They are designed to cow our country's judges, our country's courts, and legal profession. Consistent with the Chief Justice reports, these efforts cannot be sanctioned or normalized. These are clear choices facing our profession. We can choose to remain silent and allow these acts to continue, or we can stand for the rule of law and the values we hold dear. We call upon the entire profession, including lawyers who served in elected positions, to speak out against intimidation. We acknowledge that there are risks to standing up and addressing these important issues. But if the ABA and lawyers do not speak, who will speak for the organized bar? Who will speak for the judiciary? Who will protect our system of justice? If we do not speak now, when will we speak? The American Bar Association has chosen to stand and speak. Now is the time for all of us to speak with one voice. We invite you to stand with us. So that's from the American Bar Association, delivering a powerful statement here, vehemently denouncing the attacks on the rule of law and the judicial branch. Just a powerful, powerful statement here, saying we will stand for the rule of law. We are not going to cower and to stay silent in the face of judges being threatened to be impeached because they rule against the Trump administration. We are not going to do that. We are denouncing officials who are threatening to go after the judicial branch in this country. That is an attack on the rule of law, and every good lawyer who's sworn oath with bar should understand that. So they made this incredibly poignant, powerful statement this week. And then look what happened. This week, Pam Bondi's brother, Bradley, a top deputy to Ed Martin, that interim U.S. attorney in D.C., announced that he's running for president of the D.C. Bar Association, which of course will be in charge of considering complaints against political appointees at Main Justice, where his sister, Pam, is the Attorney General of the United States. Calling it a conflict of interest is minuscule. This is a full-fledged attack at DOJ and the FBI, making it to whereas the president can weaponize both agencies to go after whoever he wants, for whatever reason. And no one essentially will stand in his way because they're getting rid of the opposition within the agencies as well, which really isn't effectively opposition. They're just federal prosecutors doing their job, prosecuting officials and people who violate the law, regardless of political party or association. It is one thing to go after democratic institutions. It is one thing to go after democratic institutions and for them to be attacked from the outside, from external sources. But it is also another thing if the attacks are coming from within. That is something even more dangerous and threatening, and that puts the country in a major constitutional crisis in a way that is seriously going to take you and I, and also all of the pro-democracy lawyers, to stand up and fight back. Because what is happening here is greater than just an attack from the president attacking DOJ. It's DOJ attacking DOJ internally and going after officials and people who do not agree with the president, including redacting certain information from the Epstein files, because of course that's a major breach of national security. What exactly are we redacting here, Pam Bondi? There is a lot happening right now in the federal government. I get that. But they are creating multiple fires to divert your attention so that you are not ever focused on one specific fire. Eyes open, heads up, stay focused, stay very clear-eyed about what's happening. Do not just direct your attention on what Elon Musk is doing. Direct your attention on what they're doing at other federal government agencies and consider the fact here that they are trying to distract you because they are doing something more sinister and more nefarious in a particular government agency that they don't want you to know about. Watch what is happening here. Eyes open, heads up, stay focused. We'll be right back. There's a lot of news to get to tonight. What if I told you in just a few years America will be a dictatorship? No free speech, no fair elections, no democracy. Women's rights revoked, minority rights revoked. Project 2025 full in effect. Donald Trump as dictator of the United States. The economy in tatters, mass deportation in effect. Millions homeless, thousands suffering. It's not a conspiracy, it's a path we're headed down. You can change that. My new ebook, Resistance, is the guide on how to get through this moment. Because the only way to stop evil and authoritarianism is to fight back. And the answer is mass resistance. It's not just for activists, but for anyone who believes in democracy and defending our freedom and our rights. So the question is, are you ready to stand up or will you stand by? Click the link, read the book, make a difference. Welcome back. So, of course, this week, Donald Trump announced that the United States would no longer officially be sharing intelligence with Ukraine after the war there. Also, the United States would officially be withdrawing its military support for Ukraine. Now, this was reporting today from The Telegraph that the United States is going to cease all future military exercises in Europe, effectively freaking out NATO countries effectively, because what this means is that the United States is stepping away from globalism. If you are an occasional watcher of the Jeremiah Patterson Show, you know that we've talked about multiple times that Project 2025 calls for us not just to withdraw our support from Ukraine, but also effectively to step away from globalism. It literally says here, if an international organization does not support the American people or it's not best to its interests, effectively we should withdraw from it. So this is something that we're potentially looking at here. This, of course, comes today as there was a full missile strike in Ukraine, killing at least 25 people. At least 25 people are dead. Donald Trump's response to that was in defense of Russia, saying that any country would do something like that if they were invaded by another country. Ukraine did not invade Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. Let's be clear about that. But also, what Donald Trump is doing here is effectively aligning the United States with the Axis powers and making sure that we are not aligned with the democracies of the world, and also stepping away from globalism here. Because, of course, Zelensky is calling for peace. Zelensky said that Kyiv is ready for peace, Ukraine is ready for peace, as he is effectively still out there in the streets with his people, ensuring that their country does not completely be taken over. But of course, Trump is just not caring. This comes as of this week, as the United States is pulling back on cyber attacks against Russia. We're going to draw back on cyber warfare, even as Russia is ramping up cyber attacks on the United States. But we're not going to do cyber attacks on Russia anymore because, wait, yeah, we're pro-Russia. There's a Putin agent in the White House. Also, I should mention that in the United States no longer doing cyber attacks on Russia, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said this is to calm tensions. Yeah, there's another way to calm tensions. But honestly, it's like this huge, tit for tat. It's everything going back and forth. This week, Trump announced that we're going to put major sanctions, major large-scale sanctions on Russia until a peace agreement is reached. Really? We're going to put sanctions on Russia. Okay. In regard to sanctions and other tariffs, He also this week pulled back on his tariffs for Canada and Mexico after saying that he was going to put them in place. This is reporting here from BBC News here. Quote, bourbon is out, patriotism is out. How Canadians are facing Trump's threats head on. Quote, not long after the U.S. imposed their tariffs on Canada, a local neighborhood pub in Toronto began removing all American products off their menu. That meant nachos, wings, and of course beer must all be now made locally with Canadian ingredients or wherever not possible, non-US products from Europe or Mexico. For Lee Russell, manager at Toronto's Madison Avenue pub, the boycott was a no-brainer. She adds that it was pretty set in stone, even if the tariffs themselves are not. I'm glad that we're getting rid of American products and supporting local businesses, Ms. Russell told the BBC on Thursday. I think it's an important thing to do. This defiant stance in response to President Donald Trump's tariffs, and threats against Canada has been unfolding across the northern country, even as it braces for economic blowback that it could ultimately do little to avoid in the event of a full-blown trade war. End quote. This, of course, comes after Donald Trump continues to make incessantly threatening remarks about Canada becoming the 51st state and saying that, hey, the border between Canada and the United States is not clear enough. Maybe we should just, make you the 51st state. And Justin Trudeau is the governor. He's not a prime minister. He's a governor. Canada's the 51st state. This is something that they are continuously saying, even echoing it from the White House podium.
The president continues to call the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, Governor of Canada. I'm curious what he means by that and if there are any plans that are moving forward with trying to make Canada the 51st state. And I have a follow-up on the economy as well.
Sure. Well, the president put that in his True Social account, or his True Social post earlier today. He feels strongly that it would be very beneficial for the Canadian people to be the 51st state of the United States. They wouldn't be paying for these tariffs. They'd have much lower taxes if they were part of our great country.
We do not threaten to invade our allies. That is not how this country works. But of course, under Donald Trump, under this administration, and their anti-globalism efforts, they're not only going to withdraw from globalism, but they're also going to attack our allies, as they have threatened to attack Greenland, as they have threatened to go into Canada. This is the administration we're dealing with. Effectively, this happens as China says they are ready for any type of war, as tariffs have been put on China as well. I keep saying this on my show, eyes open, heads up, stay focused. I really do mean that. Because, your attention is being called here from the north, south, east, and west, as the news just keep getting worser and worser. This is terrible. Keep your eyes on this. This is not something that's minuscule. This is actually quite large. We're threatening to invade NATO countries. We'll be right back. Are you a fan of TJPS and looking for even deeper analysis? You can now become a paid subscriber to us on Substack. With The More You Know, it's an exclusive subscriber-only content newsletter. Essentially, The More You Know is our newly launched series. The More You Know gives exclusive in-depth looks on overlooked historical events and critical news topics. Our first feature explores how Ronald Reagan attempted yet failed to dismantle the Department of Education, something Republicans and Trump have been trying to do for a very long time. Additionally, we're very much soon going to be launching an exclusive podcast called Resistance, which will delve into the history of authoritarianism and the resilience of those who have fought back. These stories will provide historical context and inspiration for the challenges we face today. If you appreciate the free content that we provide here on YouTube and our other platforms, please consider becoming a paid subscriber on Substack to the More You Know newsletter today. As attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion ramp up in a horrific regressive move, the Department of Defense will no longer prevent its contractors from running segregated facilities. According to a memo from the Office of the Secretary of Defense dated March 5th, all acquisitions executives are directed through the military to stop including language that requires contractors to agree that they will not use segregated facilities. It specifically bars the use, F2, 52-220-21, which dates all the way back to 1965 and has been updated by a series of executive orders during multiple administrations. Allowing segregation in the military in 2025 is what we are doing now, apparently. This comes as, of course, a time when Donald Trump has banned all transgender people from serving in the armed forces and revoking mentions of LGBTQ and other diversity initiatives. War heroes, pictures of black and female soldiers are all being wiped from the Pentagon's website. There also apparently is a DEI locator device, which, when activated, targets stuff like this. This is a picture of the famous Angola gay aircraft, and it was just removed from the Pentagon's website because it apparently had the word gay in it. This DEI location device apparently is also going after pictures and articles on black military pilots, mentions of commemorative months, and Women's History Month. The Angola gay aircraft, of course, that they targeted for the word gay in it, was the very first plane to drop the atomic bomb on Japan during World War II. It was named after the mother of the plane's pilot. And apparently having the name gay is a crime in this country. So, just the idiocy in, this DEI deletion device. So as they're looking into scrubbing all mention of anything DEI related, because the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, says that we have to, the word gay came up on all their servers, and instead of looking into the history of what this actually means, they were just like, nope, we're going to take it away. I kid you not, it gets worse. This is reporting from People magazine. Quote, another puzzling decision was to remove a photo of Army Corps biologists recording information about fish. This caption of the image mentioned they were collecting data that included weight, size, hatchery, and gender. In a statement about the wide-reaching purge, Pentagon spokesperson John Hewlett said, quote, we are pleased by the rapid compliance across the department with the directive removing DEI content from all platforms. In the rare cases that content is removed that is out of the clearly outlined scope of the directive, we instruct components accordingly. DEI is dead. So this is the status quo of the United States Armed Forces right now, the purging of DEI. It was only, of course, just last week that Trump fired Air Force General Charles Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It sent shockwaves through the Pentagon. He was only the second black general to serve as a chairman. Of course, that same day, the chief of naval operations, Lisa Franchetti, was also fired. She was the first woman to lead the Navy in 2023. And because DEI is dead, those two were kicked out of their leadership roles, even though they did nothing wrong. The National Institutes of Health this week announced that they will be terminating active research grants related to the LGBTQ community and DEI studies. According to one official, at least 24 termination letters have been sent out so far. ABC News was also able to obtain copies of some of the letters, which said that essentially the canceled grants included transgender issues, gender identity, stress in LGBTQ adults, and the epidemiology of Alzheimer's disease and other dementia in LGBTQ plus adults. A part of the letter reads here, quote, this award no longer effectuates agency priorities. Research programs based on gender identity are often unscientific, have little identifiable return on investment, and do nothing to enhance the health of many Americans. Many such studies ignore rather than seriously examine biological realities. It is the policy of NIH not to prioritize these research programs. End quote. Was that written by somebody at NIH or was that written by a Trump staffer? The effort to scale back DEI in this country, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is an effort to take America back to its racism days, to take America back to its segregation days. That's exactly what this is about. Stuff like revoking and rescinding the Equal Employment Rights Act of 1965. How long is it going to be before they go after the Voting Rights Act to make it where black people and minorities can't vote in this country? I mean, they're already trying to do that with married women in this country with the Save Act to make it to whereas if you got married and oops, you took your husband's last name and it's not the name matching your birth certificate, well then you can't vote. Also, if you don't have a passport, voting's going to be a problem for you in this country. But every single time when it comes to stuff like this, there is resistance growing, and there is always a bright spot. This was out of Green Bay, Wisconsin this week as the Green Bay, Wisconsin School Board essentially voted to keep DEI in place. Watch.
Interested in canceling programs that celebrate the rich diversity of this district and of this community, or programs that prepare our children for the realities of this world. What I am not interested in is the curtailment of active advocacy and searches for a qualified, diverse workforce. So I am voting no on this one. There is nothing right about this in the spirit of civil rights, civil disobedience when called for. This is one that requires me to say hell no. So I just want to make that clear to my fellow board members. That's my position.
I just want to say publicly that I deplore the behavior that we have been witnessing throughout our country in the senseless, mindless decimation of our federal government. And now we see it in the Department of Education, and now it comes home to our own schools and to our own district. I deplore it. I hate this.
Lynn, I'm on the same page. This stinks. This takes away local control. There's $40 million invested in it, and this is absolutely atrocious that this has to come up. I'm going to plug my nose. I'm going to vote in favor of it, and I'm going to hope that we continue to do the work that we've been doing.
We have a threatening letter, which is illegal. I just don't know that I'm ready to fold tonight off of this letter that is not attached to any law that says funding would be lost.
It is my sincere hope that the district's response to the federal government's infringement on local control of our school district is to continue to expand our outreach activities.
A remarkable act of resistance. Sometimes it is slow, sometimes it is, progressional, but it does happen and it does exist. That's going to do it for today's video, today's show. Please be sure to comment any suggestions, questions, and, anything you have in terms of thoughts on this video. If you are a huge fan of the Jeremiah Patterson Show, please consider recommending it to your friends and your family. You can also support us by donating, as this is independent journalism and we rely on donations to continue this crucial work. A huge and heartfelt thank you to all who have donated to the Jeremiah Patterson Show in terms of getting my book Resistance or sending in money directly. Your donations and your generosity mean the world to me, so I appreciate that. Be sure to follow us on Blue Sky and Substack at TJPS News. If you have any questions, news topic requests, or want to do a collaboration, email me tjpsnews@gmail.com. All right, take care. I will see you back here tomorrow for our highly anticipated report at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. It is set and ready to go. It's called Eroding Freedoms, the Republican War on Democracy in the States. I'll be joined by ProPublica investigative reporter Doug Clark and Marcus Vandriel, a life and relationship coach and an LGBTQ advocate out of Australia. Thank you everyone so much. I appreciate you.